Welcome to Business as Unusual. This is the live stream where we explore the pressing issues and emerging trends that are shaping the business landscape. We're going to start in just a few minutes. So if you do have questions, I know this is a pretty interesting topic that we've been getting a lot of buzz from. So please add them to the chat, and I'm going to try to get to all of them during today's session. I'm Kathy Steele. I'm the CEO of Red Caffeine, and I will be your host today. For those of you that are not familiar with Red Caffeine, we are a growth consultancy. So we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market organizations. Our service offering includes a fractional team that is led by a senior level marketing executive, and that enables a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full-time staff members. So I had the pleasure of meeting Gary, our guest today, last year. We were both speakers at a cool conference in the commercial painting industry space. And I honestly had the good fortune of interviewing Alec Kennard, who participated on my growth panel, and he is now in the CEO officer role at Gray Days after Gary went through his ESOP. So it was pretty interesting to meet Alec and Gary and kind of hear the life cycle of that story. And so to me, it occurred to me that, as a business advisor and as our team of growth consultants are working with so many organizational leaders in the mid-market, we are sort of experiencing what they call the silver tsunami firsthand. If you haven't heard of it, it's really a phenomenon that's happening around us. There is a large generation of baby boomer owners that are going to be retiring. They're going to be succeeding their business in some way, shape, or form. They're selling or closing. And so this demographic is going to be about half of the US small businesses in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's really going to change the landscape of generational ownership. And so Gary's story touched me so much, and it's so powerful how he's actually turned his personal experience into a new service offering in business. I think that's pretty exciting and very entrepreneurial. So, but I'll let Gary tell a little bit more about that. Well, welcome, Gary. Thank you for joining us on Business as Unusual. Could you give our guests a little bit of an overview of your career journey and your business, and I'd love to hear something that's not on your professional bio.
Sure. Well, appreciate you having me, Kathy. It was great meeting you also out there in Austin. And you're right. Alec is a special guy, and I'm lucky to have him succeed me as the CEO at Great Days. So it was kind of unique that you spoke with him first, then we met out there. So a little bit about me. I founded a business, Grade A's Contracting. Started off as a residential painting contractor, like a lot of painting contractors do. Grew the business up to become a commercial contractor, ultimately specializing in warehouse and manufacturing buildings around the country. I like to say we carved a niche that was like an inch wide and a mile deep, and that's all we did. Rather than focusing on a geography, we focused on a building type, and then we just did it everywhere. So we literally worked in 48 states across the country, and even down into the Caribbean, but chasing the exact same project, a warehouse or manufacturing building. I was the CEO of Grade A's from, I guess, when I started as a kid. I wouldn't have called myself a CEO at the time.
Right.
For about 30 years. It was a 30-year career. And I ultimately sold the business in 2017 to an ESOP. I continued to lead the business even after I sold it to an ESOP. In fact, when we start talking about the benefits of an ESOP, it's one of the biggest benefits that it's not an immediate timeline where you walk out the door and trade the business for a check and head to the beach. In fact, the transaction just simply doesn't work that way. So I continue to operate the business. I continue to lead the business. I continue to make all the decisions about the business, and did so for about 5 years following the transaction before I named my successor, Alec, that you met. He and I worked alongside each other for 2 years before I retired at the beginning of 2024. And I started a business, ESOP Consulting Group, and then ultimately joined Tenor ESOP Partners as a partner. And actually, I lead their construction practice now. That's kind of the highlights of the career, the bio. I will tell you what's not on the bio is kind of how I landed at Tenor, which is interesting. Tenor was the transaction advisor for my business when we did the ESOP transaction in
Oh,
2017.
wow.
Okay, so um, I I started off interviewing transaction advisors, like most folks that are trying to do their due diligence and research and really make sure that they got the right advisors or consultants on board. Uh, I interviewed three. I interviewed a large investment banking kind of M&A firm that ESOPs was one of their specialties.
Sure.
I interviewed an accounting firm that had a ESOP practice here in Atlanta, and then I also interviewed a local attorney, a RISA attorney, who also structured transactions. I had my mind made up. I really already decided who it was going to be. My accountant says, "Hey, can I offer just one more to take a look at?" And reluctantly, I said yes. Interviewed. Thank goodness I did. It was Tenor, and that's the one I landed with. So kind of serendipitously, they became the advisor, and then here I am, 7 years later, a partner in the firm, and then helping other business owners learn more about ESOPs.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I want to make sure we preface it that, while your expertise is in, the commercial painting and that segment, you are working with other organizations as well. And ESOP
Absolutely.
is nuanced, but there's some general pieces and parts that would happen during most every transaction. You're going to talk us through
Oh
some of
yeah,
those.
regardless of the industry that the business is in, we've got a framework that we have to kind of play within. We have a whole lot of customization inside that framework, but it applies to all businesses. Uh,
Right.
at
Okay.
Tenor, we do everything from consulting firms to accounting firms, food, beverage, transportation, construction. Now, we have a very deep expertise in construction. In fact, I would say that the majority of the transactions that we do annually are in the construction world. Um, I don't think that that's for any other reason other than there's just a lot of momentum in the construction business towards
You're
ESOP.
right. Yeah.
Uh, I like to say that the ESOP is kind of a people's transaction, and construction is such a people business. What we're selling is our people's ability to go out there and deliver an experience every day and work a little bit harder than the next guy. And what better way to transition ownership except to those people that are doing it every day, and
Right. Right.
teach them how to how the job that they do in that field, how it turns into value into their retirement accounts. And so it's a natural fit in the construction world. I would say that one of the biggest challenges in construction is finding good people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So
ops are a tool for that.
absolutely. I think manufacturing is, I mean, a lot of the industrials are similar. So I kind of
You're
lump
absolutely right.
manufacturing into that space. So
Yeah,
let's kind of start it at that really high level, because honestly, while I do feel like ESOP is widely recognized as an option, it's talked about a lot. I don't know how much knowledge base there is around it. I'd love you to kind of start us there, tell us what an ESOP is.
sure.
We like to really frame out the fact that, businesses are an asset in an owner's portfolio. So,
Mhm.
giving options for that asset to be optimized or be sort of transitioned. So, talk about what an ESOP is, sort of provide an overview of other exit
Mhm.
strategies, and then, love to hear you talk a little bit about what are some of the pros of an ESOP versus what are some of the cons of an
Yeah.
ESOP.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just start with, there are a whole lot of options out there. I mean, starting with, unfortunately, liquidation, which is unfortunately what a lot of businesses that don't take the time to understand what their options are left with. When they don't take the time to find out and learn more and act at a time of their career when they still have some gas in the tank,
Right.
then they're left with only one option, which unfortunately is close the doors and liquidate the assets, which obviously provides the least amount of value. It's going to extract the least amount of value for the investment, as you put it. That's probably the largest personal investment they have is that business,
Yeah.
and just due to just timing.
I think it's kind of shocking to me, but I was talking to the board chair of a local manufacturing association here in Chicago, and he said exactly that. There were like so many owners that just even had no idea that there was any value in their assets. So like just there's just so much of a gap in education. So that's why I'm excited to hear more.
Absolutely. But when we look at exit options, they kind of fall into two general buckets. You take out the liquidation piece, they falls into two buckets. One, we can either sell outside, which is going to be maybe it's a financial buyer like private equity or a strategic buyer, somebody maybe it's a competitor or somebody that wants to add on a service that they really want to get into what you do or into the market that you're in, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. And that's what we would consider a strategic buy. And then there's internal options. We can sell to key employees. Maybe the key employees come to us and say, "Hey, we'd like to buy you out, a management buyout," or maybe it's a management buy-in where they just want to buy pieces and parts. In fact, for me, that was initially my exit strategy. The idea was a management buy-in. I felt like when I started Grade A's, I had a couple of really great key employees along the way that helped me build that business. Uh, the way I wanted to keep them was I wanted them to buy into the business and become owners of this business. I really feel like when you're into construction, that's one of the great things about construction is when you start, you typically start at the bottom, you work really hard, and then you eventually have a dream of owning your own. And to me, it felt like the best way to keep that talent on board was to sell small pieces. Um, in hindsight, it's so obvious, but it falls apart as you start to sell shares, and as the company grows, those shares become more and more valuable. And all of a sudden, you're selling a very small amount, almost an inconsequential amount of shares for a whole lot of money. You're putting the debt on a personal balance sheet that may not even be able to accept that debt. And so I started to recognize that that's probably not going to be my ultimate exit strategy. Works really well in the beginning when it's a small company. As the company starts to grow, it starts to become a little harder. And so that's when I started looking at other options. I liked the idea of selling inside, but I knew that the management buy-in route wasn't going to be it for me.
Yeah,
So
I've heard that. I've heard that from others that have gone down that path, that it becomes sometimes untenable to actually, acquire shares because it's just so costly.
right, yeah. I mean, at the time of the leader's life, that when I wanted them to buy in, they were had growing families, and they were making
Right.
decisions between buying the next big house for their growing family or buying shares at Great A's. And
Yeah.
it just obviously the conversation around the dinner table may not have gone my way. so, uh, so I started doing some investigation and research and talking with other peers. I had a couple of different peer groups that I was in with other business owners, and started to learn more about the idea of employee ownership and ESOP. And ESOP is just an acronym for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And I started to learn more and realize that this may be the answer for what I was looking for. It was going to be able to give me the ability to keep the team together and preserve the culture that I built, but also get fair market value for the shares that I was selling. Be able to de-risk and take some chips off the table, but do it
Right.
on my own timeline. That was important to me. When I sold the business, I was, gosh, I was 45 when I sold into an ESOP. So there's a lot of gas left in the tank. I wasn't ready
Right.
to step aside. I wanted to. I was having a great time doing what I was doing, but it was just time for me to start to diversify my own personal investment and put it into some other things and some other interests that I had. So with that, I landed on ESOP, and That was in 2017. And as I mentioned earlier, I continued to operate the business for 5 years when nothing changed operationally in the operational leadership of the business. One of the things about ESOP is it's a transition of ownership, not necessarily, and not at all a transition of management. It is two
Yeah.
different things. Uh, so ESOP is, like I said, an acronym for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, and what that means is it's a qualified retirement plan uh, that invests solely in the sponsoring company. So it's going to look and feel a lot like a 401k to the plan participants, to your employees. But it invests only in one stock, and that's the stock of the sponsoring business. So the Grade A's ESOP invested only in the stock of Grade A's Contracting solely. Um, what that meant for your employees is a couple of good things. One is that their blood, sweat, and tears actually created value in their retirement accounts. Unlike the 401k, where that may be invested in a multitude of different stocks and was highly diversified, and they had some Home Depot, maybe some Coca-Cola, and all these really great blue chip stocks, but it didn't matter how many orange buckets they bought or Coca-Colas they drank, it wasn't going to affect the value.
Right.
Right. But when they get out and they, the long evenings or jumping on those airplanes or staying, spend a little extra time on that job to make sure that the customer is happy and buys again, well, that actually adds value to their retirement accounts. So, big advantage for the employees just in terms of engagement and alignment. Uh, it's also a big advantage to the employees because, unlike a 401k, this account's going to grow much faster. Uh, you ESOP accounts typically grow 2 to 3 times faster than 401k accounts.
Wow.
So it's like a retirement windfall for your employees, unlike what they would receive in a 401k and or what they may receive for Social Security after retirement. Um, again, it's like a 401k on steroids, from the employee's perspective, but it's also a very tax advantage exit strategy for the selling shareholder. And so when I start talking about advantages, first and foremost, it's a retirement plan. It's a qualified retirement plan, which means it's we're going to have certain rules that we've got to follow, and that we can't break, and it's just like your 401k. And then the next, really 6 advantages are incentive for the employer or the selling shareholder to choose this option for ESOP, because what you're doing is kind of it's a gift of opportunity for your
Right.
employees, and this is
Yeah.
incentive for you to give that gift of opportunity to your employees. As you see on the screen, we've got a number of advantages. First and foremost, like I said, it's a qualified retirement plan that becomes a windfall for employees. The second benefit is that the shareholders are going to receive fair market value for their shares. So one of the misconceptions that we often hear is that you have to sell your shares at a discount. That's absolutely not the case, because nobody would do it. You know, uh, you know this is likely the biggest asset on your personal balance sheet as a business owner, and you deserve fair market value for all that hard work. And what happens in an ESOP is we create first a trust, and there'll be a trustee, and that will be the buyer for the stock. And there'll be a negotiation between the seller and the buyer, and the buyer will also get the help of a third party valuation firm or a financial advisor to guarantee that the buyer doesn't overpay, but also that we're going to negotiate the highest value possible for those shares of stock. And that's what a transaction advisor does. That's what I do now, is that I ensure that we are getting the maximum value for the selling shareholder when we're negotiating that transaction with the trustee. So first benefit to the owner, to incentivize them to take advantage of this ESOP transaction, is that they're guaranteed fair market value, because it's a fair negotiation between a buyer and a seller. Second thing is that the selling shareholder can retain control. Just like I had mentioned, I continued the CEO. I was still making all the same decisions. If I wanted to hire somebody, I hired them. If I wanted to buy a truck, I bought a truck. There was nobody to answer to. So although this trustee is the buyer, this is a transfer of ownership again, not a transfer of management. So the
Yeah.
transfer of management happens on the selling shareholder's personal timeline, just like it did with me. I went 5 years before I announced my successor. Uh, I had a decision to make. I had two or three options. We chose the best of those two or three options. I was able to work alongside Alec for 2 years before I turned over all the operational responsibility to him. So, he and I were connected at the hip, and I was able to make sure that the business was ready for him, and he was ready for the business before
Yeah.
I transferred ownership.
I feel like that speaks to Neil's question around like if you have this desire to ESOP, but maybe you don't see that you have the internal team, that is really the right people to transition the business, that you still have those options. It's not like, all right,
Absolutely.
I'm in ESOP and now I'm stuck with, this is my only option. You're still going to be able to hire for or, be planful in how the business gets transitioned from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, there's no regulation saying that there's a timeline that the selling shareholder must exit the business. We deal with business owners. I talk to hundreds of business owners every year. We do a number of transactions every year, and every single one of them is a little different. We have some that are interested in a quicker transition of that responsibility. Maybe they already have the team in line, and they're just using this as a financial way to get paid, de-risk, take the chips off the table, and then and move on through management succession pretty quickly. And we have others that maybe they don't have a plan quite yet, but they're ready to start de-risking, and they're ready to use this as a tool to help them in that succession plan. These transactions are highly customizable. Just like the business owners that come in, everyone's got a different story. So these transactions we can do 30% sale all the way up to 100% sale.
Okay, right. So there's some variability into how much stock actually gets off.
Absolutely. There's also some customization of the plan itself. I mean, there's going to be a framework. We've got to treat everybody the same. We can't discriminate between employees or anything like that. Every W-2 employee in the business will participate in the ESOP. So it's not you can some do and some don't. It's just like your 401k. You have to offer it for everybody. But there is some customizations that we can do inside the plan, whether it be vesting schedules or time before they are permitted into the plan. But again, if we have a 1 year wait period, it's a 1 year wait period for everybody. So again, being a qualified plan, there is a framework that we must follow, but there's a lot of customization. There's also a lot of customization in the transaction itself and how we, whether we take on some bank debt and leverage it, or maybe the selling shareholder prefers to take 100% seller financing of the transaction. So there is every deal is a little different, and if you have a good transaction advisor that listens to the objectives that the selling shareholder is trying to achieve, then we can accomplish most of those through an ESOP.
Okay.
It's a much friendlier transaction, unlike what you would do selling to a third party, where the third party is going to dictate a lot of those terms, what they're willing to do for this purchase. In this case, it kind of flips the script a little bit, where the selling shareholder has a lot more control over this transaction.
Yeah, I feel like, a lot of companies, we've been financially transparent, so we have a lot of relationships with other organizations that are great game of business players, and it kind of, there's a lot of appetite for ESOP when you are already sharing those kinds of details and you're expecting that kind of owner mentality and really making sure people are clear on how you go to market, how you make money, those kinds of things sort of set up well for that employee ownership culture. So, but I would love to just hear, like, I know there's a lot of negative, sort of PR around ESOPs. I don't think I feel like I've heard it as much recently. So could you talk through some of the disadvantages, there that, we should have on our minds as we're considering all the options?
Sure. Yeah. One of them I sort of touched on just now is that the biggest uh, downside to an ESOP or disadvantage over a third party sale is that you will likely not receive 100% cash at closing.
Well,
Uh,
and then just let's clarify that sometimes you don't receive 100% at exit in a
that's right.
selling to a strategic or private equity. I think that,
Most times I would tell you that you're probably not going to get
yeah,
full cash
there's
at
some
closing.
contingency
That's right.
baked in.
Yep, that's right. Exactly. In an ESOP, uh, the 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 liquidity at closing is dictated by the leverage we put on the business. Okay, so we'll do a transaction, and then we will go out to the bank to leverage that transaction. That's what actually creates the liquidity at closing, or the cash at closing, is how much cash we can get from the bank. That's what creates the cash closing. Um, the uh, the selling shareholder at closing is going to be paid really they're going to receive three different things. One, you're going to receive an interest bearing note at closing. So at that point, the selling shareholder can decide whether or not they want to go get bank debt, and that'll decide how much cash. So they could potentially have some cash at closing, an interest bearing note at closing. And then the third piece of this financing is a thing called a warrant. And one of the advantages, and probably one of the most unknown advantages of an ESOP, is that we're going to sell 100% of the business, or we're going to sell whatever portion of the business. If you sell 100%, then we're immediately following the close of the transaction, we're going to carve out a portion of that equity and give it back and put it in two buckets. One is going to incentivize the selling shareholder for taking on that note, that 100% financing note, or whatever portion of it they take. And then the other bucket is going to be put in a bucket of synthetic equity we're going to use for key management personnel to incentivize them with equity awards.
Okay.
Okay, so at closing, again, the selling shareholder is going to have kind of three different things. One, a warrant, some equity that they will exercise in the future and gives them an opportunity to participate in the future growth of the business. Some cash at closing. Usually, it's a significant amount. Usually, it's 30 to 40% in cash, and then the balance in an interest-bearing note. Okay, so you can look at that as a disadvantage depending on what your objectives are. If your idea is to trade your business and the team and the culture and for a check at closing and head to the beach, this is probably not the transaction for you. But if you're interested in de-risking slowly, keeping control of the business for some period of time, you still have gas in the tank, and you're still liking what you're doing, and you want to work for some portion of the time to ensure that your money is coming back to you, you're going to get the full value of that transaction, then an ESOP's a great opportunity because the tax advantages for an ESOP are unlike any of the other transactions. Okay, we're gonna get into those tax advantages, but let's just hit real quick these disadvantages. Uh, the selling shareholder is likely going to want to stay on for some period of time because again they're not going to get 100% cash at closing, so they want to stay on and continue to operate the business efficiently and effectively and ensure they get all the cash out of the transaction. And there's going to be some ongoing administration cost for an ESOP. It's going to be similar to like your 401k. You're going to still have a third party administrator that you're going to need to pay. The only thing above and beyond that's required of an ESOP over a 401k is an annual valuation, and there's some cost to an annual valuation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We also recommend a trustee uh, that you would also hire on an annual ongoing basis, but it's not a requirement. You can be
Okay.
your own trustee, but we will always recommend that that's a good idea. And I can tell you the ongoing administration costs are easily offset by the annual tax savings. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the annual tax savings that you're going to see in these transactions.
Yeah. Well, I love, the setup. I think one of the things that I loved about your talk in Austin was this business case that you really, kind of broke it down for us. Kind of what kind of criteria fits an ESOP. So like what's the threshold of being really ready for that type of transaction? And so like, would this be a good time to sort of step through that business case?
Yeah, well, you touch on something before we hit that business case. What size business? I'll start with telling you that there is no regulation that says that a business has to be a certain size to be an ESOP. It's really it really comes down to more of a financial decision because it takes a village to close an ESOP transaction. I mean, what we're doing in an ESOP transaction is we're creating the buyer for the business. Okay, and in doing that, we're going to have a buy side, and then we're going to have a sell side. The sell side, obviously, is a selling shareholder, a transaction advisor, somebody like what we do, that's going to represent that selling shareholder to ensure that they get maximum value for the transaction. We're also going to do a lot of the modeling and all those sort of things, and then we're also going to have an attorney on our side representing our side, and then we're going to also create the buy side, which is a trustee that we will negotiate. That's the actual buyer that we'll be negotiating with. The trustee will have a valuation firm, that there's an expense there, and we'll also have a third party administrator. So what I would tell you is that all those professionals, that village of professionals, believe it or not, everybody wants to get paid. So there's a certain size transaction. It's about $1 million in EBITDA that becomes or net income that we will recast to an EBITDA, and about $1 million is kind of where it starts to make sense. $2
Okay.
million, it's a no-brainer. Okay, but $1 million edge case just depends on the business and the objectives of the selling shareholder. But once you get to $2 million, the tax savings, it's almost a no-brainer that ESOPs make sense, even with the fees. Okay, so this business case, we just took a kind of that minimum transaction size that becomes a no-brainer, and I'm just going to point out a few key points in the transaction. So we're going to assume this business is a $2 million EBITDA or $2 million in cash flow annually in the business. Okay, so EBITDA earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So we're going to take out all the taxes, all the interest that the business might be paying, everything to try to compare, a real number, real earnings of the business, regardless of the structure of the business. $2 million. And assuming that $2 million, assuming we'd get somewhere between a 4 to 7 multiple, which is kind of a general multiple for privately held businesses in this size range. And this is just this is a very general case. So I'm going to give you the disclaimer that this is a very general case, depending on the business and depending on all the debt, all these different things. Let's just say $2 million business, that this transaction is worth $10 million. That we can sell this business for $10 million in enterprise value. $2 million times 5 multiple. If we were to do that, and one of the big benefits of an ESOP is there is a possibility, if it's structured correctly, that this selling shareholder could elect a 1042 IRC 1042 exchange, which is very similar to like a 1031 exchange in real estate. But if they get a 1042 election, then we could permanently, or at least defer capital gains for the life of the shareholder by reinvesting the proceeds of this transaction into qualified replacement property. This is kind of like you do in real estate, where you reinvest the proceeds from the transaction into another investment. Very similarly, what we would do in an ESOP. If the selling shareholder elected that would save them $2.35 million in taxes. Just the capital gains, federal capital gains alone, before state capital gains. So my friends up in New York or out in California, this becomes a $3.5 million savings.
Wow. Yeah.
So when you compare the transactions between a third-party sale and an ESOP, you also have to consider, it's all about net proceeds. How much money am I going to put in my bank account? And if I could put $10 million versus $7.65 million in my bank account, that's a big advantage of an ESOP.
Sure
So
is.
potential tax savings, selling shareholders electing a 1042 could potentially save $2.35 million, putting a full $10 million in their bank account. The potential state tax again is anywhere from zero in our, tax-free states, states with no income, state income tax
Sure.
versus, some of our higher ones. Um, the company also receives a permanent annual savings. If we close this transaction and the business continues a 100% ESOP owned business with an S corp tax election, the business ultimately becomes a for-profit tax-free entity, meaning they don't pay any corporate income tax ever again, and that's a
Super
permanent tax saving,
interesting.
right? Uh, in this particular case, I'm assuming that the business owner in this $2 million cash flow business is probably distributing about 40% of net income each year to the selling shareholders or to the shareholders. And then they go in, they pay their personal tax bill, whatever's left over in that 40%, which is probably not a whole lot, becomes their sort of annual distribution bonus each year. This is kind of a pretty typical way that S corp business owners handle that K1 tax liability.
Yeah,
So,
super. I think this really simplified, it for me, and it gave sort of a structure to the idea that I hadn't really seen anybody do well prior. So I love that you talk through the business case, kind of talk through the base case of what you would need to have in place, and then I think that things like a 401k, like you can still have other
oh,
kind of
absolutely.
benefits for your employees, but now they're also getting the benefit of an ownership stake in the business. I think the other thing that I didn't realize maybe up until a couple of years ago was that ESOPs could also be sold. So down the road, there is an opportunity to sell an ESOP to a strategic buyer. And talking to one leader that did that, that was probably one of the most exciting parts of the puzzle of selling that business was the fact that everyone won, like the
Yes.
whole team participated in that exit. And that to me is a lot different than some of the other types of exit you hear about, and how it's shocking to employees. It's not planned for, the culture
Yeah,
suffers. So it just can be a really, really different experience for your culture and employees post a transaction. So just interesting
absolutely.
things that I think I just love to share out, because I guess I would have assumed that you could sell an ESOP, but until you hear the stories from other entrepreneurs, you don't really.
Absolutely. Selling to an ESOP does not prevent you from selling the business later to a third party buyer, whether it
Yeah.
be a strategic or even a financial buyer. In fact, if you think about it, what's happened is that selling shareholder took advantage of all these great tax savings. It put the business in a great spot where it no longer paid tax. It was able to quickly amortize that debt for the first initial transaction
Yeah.
very quickly. In this case, it's 5 years. If you think about it, this business will generate $2 million a year in cash flows on a $10 million transaction. They're easily out of debt in 5 years because they no longer have any tax drag.
Yeah, and I
Once,
feel like there's a lot of interest in ESOPs from private equity now because of just that ownership culture. It's
absolutely.
also become, something that private equity is even looking at in terms of ideal
Yeah, the
businesses to
largest private equity firms in the nation now are using, stealing pages out of our playbook
yeah.
to put into their biggest investments. They're looking at and buying ESOP businesses because ESOP businesses, have the advantage of alignment of all of their people and their purpose and their profits of their business all aligned. And that creates a lot of growth, and it really accelerates growth in the business. It perked up the eyes of all of our private equity friends. These businesses operate. One of the things that we see, when we start thinking about, so there, this is kind of the dollars and cents, right? You can quickly
Right.
amortize the debt. One of the other things I want to point out before we move off of this slide, assuming that this business continues to grow at about 5% in 10 years. Remember that equity bucket, that second bite of the apple we talked about?
Right.
Synthetic equity in 10 years in this business would be worth almost as much as the transaction value, the original transaction value. So it's like selling that business twice. Once, in a very tax advantaged manner, and then the second, when you exercise that synthetic equity, potentially another $9.5 million later. So that $9.5 million is split between the selling shareholder and then the management that's continuing to run this business. So now the selling shareholder and the key managers are now earning side by side, growing this business in alignment, complete alignment, as well as the plan participants, all the employees in the business. Everybody's motivated and aligned around one single thing, and that's the share price that we get a valuation each year, and we celebrate that share price each and every year. So when we start thinking about some of the advantages outside of this dollars and cents, there's been study after study after study about how well businesses perform post ESOP transaction. NCEO, the National Center for Employee Ownership, and Rutgers have done study after study talking about how quickly businesses grow once they go ESOP. There's studies that say that ESOP businesses grow at least 10% faster than their non-ESOP peers. So what does private equity want? Private equity wants growth, right? That's how they make money, is they buy low, they grow the business, and they sell it again. So it's a no-brainer to see what that alignment does. The result is faster growth, better alignment, with your people. In fact, if we go to that next slide, I mentioned a couple things. Here's the reports around the growth. Alignment. It creates alignment. Typically, businesses, ESOP businesses, the participants typically make more money in wages, and they typically have 2 to 3 times retirement count balances as their non-ESOP peers. When I say that the retirement it's very similar to a 401k, but on steroids, I can tell you that at our company at Grade A's, we see it. We've got folks with account balances, 6-figure account balances in less than 5 years.
Wow.
These folks that have been there since the beginning have, multiple $100,000 account balances in their retirement.
Yeah, that's what you hear. I mean, like I've heard a lot of that in great game companies. I do think that there is some education around what to expect post-transaction. I also have heard from friends that have ESOP where they're like, oh, we had to explain the difference in the first year bonusing structure because we were, sort of funding the transaction. So to me, there's just some things to get in front of in terms of what this long-term advantage looks like versus what you might experience as an employee owner in the short term. Like you're an owner now, so there's a whole
There's some
different
education that goes to that. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some education. I mean, think about all of us that have been running businesses for all these years. We sort of have the curse of knowledge. We
Right.
know all this stuff, but your employees don't necessarily know that. So what I would tell you that, when I think of some of the things that looking back right after the transaction that I wish I had known is that how much communication is required following the transaction.
Yeah.
There is some training involved with your people. One of the misconceptions around an ESOP is that I'm required to share the financials of the business with all my employees. That's not a requirement. There's nothing that says that you have to, but I would tell you that you're going to have to be comfortable with some level of financial transparency to really get the full value of an ESOP. That's part of that educating and communicating that you have to do right after the sale, because you're going to go in and you're going to announce, hey, you guys are all owners. They're going to say, okay, well, show me the numbers. Well, you need to have a plan for that.
Exactly. And it's a big education process to
It is.
create financial literacy from a business owner standpoint. I know that many of our employees have even said that it's helped them with their personal finances to have that kind of knowledge base, but it's not something that just happens overnight. You absolutely have to bake it in.
Yeah, we already were pretty transparent. We already had a more of an open book management style already, and I would tell you that ESOPs are just going to help add to that. It's all part of a great culture. When you have
Right.
transparency and accountability, and everybody's fighting for collective results already, and then we install an ESOP and overlay an ESOP with that. It's going to basically it's like pouring gas on an already burning fire, right? It's not going to fix a bad culture, but it's certainly going to accelerate a great culture. It's really just it's helping your people. It's giving people a stake in the outcome. It's helping them, giving them a piece and really allowing them to put their sweat equity into a business and earn right alongside those selling shareholders instead of they work their tails off and two or three people at the top get all the benefit. Instead, we're sharing it across the company.
Yeah.
And, and one of the other misconceptions I want to dispel or I want to bust in this podcast today is that people think that their employees have to buy these shares. There is no money out of pocket for your employees. The shares are given to the employees over time, over a long period of time, and it's based on total compensation. So a person that makes $250,000 a year will receive 5 times more shares than the person that makes $50,000 a year.
Okay.
Okay, so the shares are given over time, and it's based on total compensation. Those folks that are they put shares in their account, and then each year the share value grows, and each year they get additional shares. So that compounding effect is what allows these accounts to grow so quickly. And it's a lot of talking about, a lot of projecting, a lot of over communication in that first year to help your employees understand that that's the case and really see it, because you don't see anything the first year. And as we know, everybody
Right.
wants to, they want to know the day you tell them you're an owner, it's like, okay, when do I get paid? Yeah, you're not going to get paid the first year, but you stick with me, and there's potential for you to retire in a very much better position. Uh, we're adding to something that we already have. What I tell or what I recommend is that when people do an ESOP, don't take your 401k away. Leave everything they have. This is adding to it because the one of the toughest times is that first 1 to 2 years when account values are just starting to grow and they're starting to add shares, and before this compounding really takes effect. And you need to leave everything in place and let this become incremental addition to what they already have. Uh,
Right. Right.
so, looking back, that was one of the things that we did right, is that we didn't take anything away. We didn't adjust anything. We certainly didn't adjust bonus structures. We didn't take any 401ks away. We didn't take profit sharing away. All that stuff stayed in place. And I would tell you, it's still in place today. We
Yeah.
still today have a 401k plan. We have profit sharing, and we layered on the ESOP so that our employees they have really good opportunity for retirement now that
Yeah.
they would have never had going anywhere else and working anywhere else. And that's allowed us to really retain so much of our talent at Great Ace.
Yeah, and it's not really common, I would assume, in the type of business that you're in. Even, if you own your own business, if you're not doing the work, you're likely not earning a paycheck. So I think that this does position people for a different type of personal exit as well as the business.
Oh
So
yeah.
Gary, I'd love, I want to make sure we have time to run through, some of the elements of the process. So can
Yep.
you talk us through what the process looks like, and then we'll kind of talk about the timing of the process.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, if we can hit that next slide, let's. This kind of outlines the steps. Now, at Tenor ESOP Partners, we break the transaction down really into 3 steps, and I add this first one, the fourth, because that's kind of where we are right now. That's where all of our viewers are right now. Is that they're doing some research and just sort of personal reflection on, is this make sense for me and my business? And I would tell you that there's a number of places that you can go to get information. Some are more credible than others. You're gonna find all kinds of misconceptions on the internet. In fact, you and I were just talking before this webinar that a lot of the stuff you read, you hear about the failed ESOPs. You can find information on those. You find less information on the wildly successful ones. But I'd point you to there's a number of them. Publix is a perfect example. That's the largest ESOP in the world right now. Is Publix. Wawa is another one that my Northeast friends love. Everybody loves Wawa.
Yeah.
ESOP transaction. There are besides those big ones, there are thousands of other ones across the country. That previous slide said there were 7,000 ESOPs representing 14 million people. One of the funny things to prove a point you were just talking about, that number stays pretty much the same, about 6,500 to 7,000 ESOPs. And I used to scratch my head. Why is this? Why didn't this number just explode like I would expect it to? It's because for every ESOP that is created, another one is bought or combined. Because to your point, ESOPs run very effectively or run very efficiently, profitable businesses, which makes them very attractive to buyers. So just as many that are being formed, there's just as many being bought in every year. So that sort of stays flat.
Got it.
So step one, research, go out to the NCEO, National Center of Employee Ownership, nceo.org. Take a look at our website, tenoresop.com, or contractoresop.com is another one of our websites. Tons and tons of information, some light reading there that'll help you. But our first step, it's all about research, personal strategy. And then from there, if you would like to move forward, then we would do is we would put you through a 3-phase process. First step of this process is modeling and analysis. This is really for us to, it's almost like a dad joke, but I'm going to paint you the perfect picture of this transaction in this modeling and analysis phase. This is where we will take the projections from the selling shareholder. They'll tell us, okay, this is where we think the business will be over the course of the next 5 years, projecting revenue, cash flows, tell us about the business, and we're going to provide them with a model and an analysis of the entire transaction. There's going to basically be 3 deliverables with this phase. First deliverable is a model of the entire transaction. What we think the value of the business will be over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, what the tax savings would be for that business, how the transaction would look compared to a strategic buyer or a financial buyer. And this is going to be a kind of an iterative process. We're going to go through multiple scenarios. And we're going to want to pressure test the numbers, high numbers, low numbers, so on and so forth. So that's the first deliverable. Second deliverable is we will also provide you with a floor value for the business, what we can sell this business for. And then the third one, we'll go out and do what we call a soft finance raise, and we can provide you with how much liquidity you can expect at closing. So it kind of answers, your 3 threshold questions. How quickly can I get out of debt? What's my business worth? And how much money am I going to get at closing? That's step 2, what we call our stage 1 modeling and analysis phase. This again is an iterative process. We'll run a number of scenarios, and then we will move into what we call the due diligence phase. This is where we start to assemble that buy and sell side team. That phase ends with a negotiation between us, where we as a transaction advisor represent the seller, negotiating with a trustee, and we land on the value of the business. And then we have another decision point. And do we move forward? Once we decide that, hey, this is good, I got what I want, we move into the final phase, which is the closing and the phase and the finance raise. We run both of them in parallel. The closing phase is basically where we're going to write up plan documents. We're going to paper the transaction. And then in parallel, we're also going to do a finance raise, go out to our network of banks, solicit term sheets to get you the best financing possible. So if we'll go to that next slide, let's talk about kind of the timeline. So research, personal strategy, steps into modeling and analysis. This can be as quick as 30 days. When you come to us and you say, here are our projections, here's all the information, we'll send out an information packet, about a 3-page package. You'll send that back to us. 30 days later, we're going to provide this very intense report, extensive report on, again, the amortization schedule of the debt, comparing the transaction to other transactions, value, as well as a soft finance raise. We'll turn that around in about 30 days. But we will run as many scenarios as you like up to a year in that phase. And there's no obligation to move forward with a transaction. This is just, again, just giving you all of the answers so you can decide,
Yeah.
do I want to move forward? Then we move into the due diligence phase. This is about 30 to 45 days. This is going to feel like a second part-time job. Okay. Uh, Tough process, just like it is with a third party sale, but a whole lot less evasive or arduous than it would be with a third party sale. It's a lot quicker, a lot more efficient, but we create a data room. We populate the data room with all the documents to support the model that we created in phase one. Decision point, once we end that with the negotiation of value with the trustee, there's another decision point, and we move into the closing phase again, 30 days. So end to end, typical transactions, we can run 90 to 120 days in a typical transaction. 90 days to 120 days following that modeling. Once you're comfortable, we get the structure that works for the selling shareholder. Because again, every business is different. Everybody's objectives are a little bit different. So that's kind of the overview of the transaction. It's a much quicker, more efficient, much friendlier transaction than it would be with a third-party sale. It's a lot less disturbing as well, or interruptive to the business itself. A lot of times what we see in third-party sales, and I'm sure you can speak to this, Kathy, is that we see a whole lot of time and effort fall apart at the closing table.
Right. I mean, time kills all deals. I even, probably like the tighter end of the transaction happening versus it extending out to a year, because I know business owners, we get caught up in other things, and
Right.
it's I think it's something you want to stay on course for once you've made the determination and done that initial modeling. I think it feels like pull the trigger, don't sit and stew too long.
You're absolutely right. And there's also some risk in timing, right? A lot can
Yeah,
happen in the world in a year. So,
exactly. Yeah.
a lot of things that are outside of our control that affect value. So, to your point, yes, but we can move as quickly as the selling shareholder cares to move.
Yeah. Well, Gary, I know we're running out of time. I'd love to just get a final thought, like, from you, based on your experience in helping others. Like, what would you leave our guests with today, just kind of as a final thought?
Yeah, so I would tell everybody as a final thought, regardless of where you are in your business career, uh, start thinking about an exit option. I mean, it's starting with the end in mind. One of our jobs, our biggest job as a CEO or a business owner, is creating value, and one of our biggest challenges is how we're going to unlock that value. And you got to start early. It's not something you can do when you're out of gas and you're ready to hang it up, and then it's time. Now I'm going to start thinking about how to unlock this value. You've waited too late. Even as quickly as this transaction can be done, you still have a lot of time just in your own personal strategy and your own personal research, understanding what you need to do. So I would just tell you, start early. Reach out to professionals that do this, get advice, and really think about what's going to get you what you want. If you're looking to trade a check and head to the beach, then maybe we want to talk to somebody else. If you want to start de-risking over time, you want time to execute on a succession plan, build your bench to create a succession plan. You can start de-risking early through an ESOP transaction, continue running the business, and remember, you still get to participate in that future value growth.
Right. I love, multiple bites of an apple. That's always a very appealing option, and not having to like exit quickly. So Gary, I want to give people an opportunity to see how to get connected to you. This is Gary's LinkedIn account, his email address. So if you have more questions, Neil, thank you for the affirmation of the information shared today. I'm sure people will have additional questions, so feel free to reach out to Gary and just put business as unusual in the subject line so he knows that you're coming from our live stream today. I want to also thank our sponsors, M3 Learning. They are really one of the most influential and successful sales management and training companies. They are building sales superstars. We love the folks at M3. Our other sponsor, HR Source. I think a lot of employers have been going through some volatility as they've started this year. So these gals and guys are the go-to resource for employers. They've got the hotline for urgent questions. They've got an exchange so you can network with HR professionals and peers. They've got data around salary, augment or replace a role that you need in your HR team. So great people at HR Source. And lastly, I wanted to introduce our next guest, the vivacious and spicy and savvy and cool business leader, Kate Rome, is going to be talking about her experience in thinking about, being a third generation leader and what she wants to do with her food manufacturing organization. So she's been working with us for a couple of years. We don't frequently do this type of thing, but she's going to share her story around, really that decision to take the business to the next stage of growth versus sort of the alternative of what's going on in the food manufacturing and the manufacturing space, where lots of other owner operators are choosing to sell to PE versus scale their organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about how actually positioning her organization as a family-owned and operated business is setting her apart from her competitors. We're going to talk a little bit about her brand and the consistency of it showing up has set them up well for both acquiring customers and acquiring new employees. We are going to talk about how we've dug into sales and marketing strategies, really understanding and helping them build a scalable process to focus on acquiring more blue chip accounts. And then I think the really cool thing about Kate is telling the story about the intangible, how this effort has really impacted her internal culture, and it's boosted the morale of the team to really take the team along on this sort of repositioning exercise, this new go-to-market or grow-to-market, as we call it, exercise that they've endeavored upon. So excited to share this story and feature Kate next month. Gary, thank you again. I really, really hope that people got a lot from this session. I feel like you shared a ton of information. I learned some new things that I didn't learn back in October when I first heard you speak. So thank you so much for being a part of BAU today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I know it feels a lot like sipping out of a fire hydrant. It's a lot of information. Please reach out with any kind of questions, anything I can do to help the audience. Happy to help. Kathy, thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, absolutely. I really, again, thank you for joining me. It was an exciting and it went really quick. So just as we wrap up, I just, want to say that if you've got another question about growth or succession, reach out to Gary, reach out to one of us at Red Caffeine. Happy to talk to you more about what's going on with your organization. And then until next time, let's continue to challenge the usual. Thank you.